I'm Jen Litt, the Assistant Director for the festival, and welcome once again to the 17th Annual Palm Beach Poetry Festival, and to today's Craft Talks, featuring Tim Seibles and Karin De Weille. The Craft Talk with Tim Seibles is titled Texture in Poetry, Satin versus Corduroy. And the Craft Talk with Karin is entitled Exploring Metaphor, the Extraordinary Range of Possibilities. Each poet will discuss his or her craft for 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A. And remember that the chat session is there for you to weigh in with your feelings and responses to the talk, but make sure that you put questions for Tim and for Karin into the Q&A section. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our founder and president, Miles Kuhn. Hi, Miles, and his wife, Mimi. Hi, Mimi. Our sponsors, Morgan Stanley, the Legacy Group of Atlanta, Gladstone Media, the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, Visit Florida, Murder on the Beach Bookstore, the National Endowment for the Arts, and all of our other sponsors and supporters. And I just want you to know that after this craft talk and Q&A, you can head for the virtual bookstore between 4 and 5 to have Tim and Karin to speak to them and purchase a book. Don't forget our virtual open mic 3 this afternoon at 4. And tonight is our final reading with David Baker, Vievee Francis, and Eduardo C. Corral. And again, there will be virtual book signing. I think we're ready to get started. Okay, Tim, you'll go first, Karin second.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'd like to begin with a quote from Walt Whitman's preface to the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass, in part because I think it connects directly to what I'm going to talk about, but also because I think it's a lovely way to think about poems. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches, give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. I mean, he makes reference to these leaves referring to the leaves of grass, but I like to think of him referring to just poems. Read poems in the open air every day, you know? And he talks about how the body itself will be transformed into a great poem. And my talk is about Satin versus Corduroy, texture in poetry. And that's exactly a part of my point, is that we are inhabited, you know, by these things in poems. Let me introduce my talk this way. Generally speaking, when we think about texture, we think about how something feels to the touch. A fabric, the fur of a cat, someone's skin, polished wood, etc. I've often heard of texture in poetry defined as the poem's imagery. Whatever language in the poem evokes the physical world is seen as texture. However, because a good poem usually takes hold of our entire sensorium, I would like to consider sound, pacing, tone, and imagery as essential to poetic texture. We are, for lack of a better word, touched by each of these aspects of poetry. We can be soothed or scraped, troubled or calmed by these features of a poem. Sometimes we feel roughed up and soothed almost simultaneously. To the extent that we are conscious of the potential effects of our craft choices, we can bring more to the poem, more texture, and therefore more to ourselves as writers, and certainly more to anyone who encounters our work at a reading or sitting alone with our work on a page. Here are a few poems just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Just want to do some contrasting in terms of satin and corduroy. Soft and rough, I guess is really what I'm talking about. This is an old poem, an old lyric by Georgia Douglas Johnson. She was a writer of some repute during the Harlem Renaissance in the early part of the 20th century. Some of you know this poem probably. I want to die while you love me, while yet you hold me fair, while laughter lies upon my lips and lights are in my hair. I want to die while you love me. I could not bear to see the glory of this perfect day grow dim or cease to be. I want to die while you love me. Oh, who would care to live till love has nothing more to ask and nothing more to give? I want to die while you love me and bear to that still bed your kisses, turbulent, unspent, to warm me when I'm dead. You see, that's just a sweet poem, right? A sweet poem. It would definitely, for me, fall under the category of satin. I mean, even the music of the poem, right? While laughter lies upon my lips. There it is. Those L's, the way they add up, you know, while laughter lies upon my lips and lights are in my hair. See, that's it. It's all over after that, right? We know we're being carried into this kind of misty dream, you know, so soft, you know, so soft to the touch. If we think about touch being what we hear, you know, what we feel in our bones when we hear this poem, right? This is a poem by I, the great poet I, A.I. Many of you know who this is. I offer this in contrast. I offer this as corduroy. Reunions with a ghost. The first night God created was too weak. It fell down on its back, a woman in a cobalt blue dress. I was that woman, and I didn't die. I lived for you, but you didn't care. You're drunk again, turned inward as always. Nobody has trouble like I do, you tell me, unzipping your pants to show me the scar on your thigh where the train sliced into you when you were 10. You talk about it with wonder and self-contempt because you didn't die and you think you deserve to. When I kneel to touch it, you just stand there with your eyes closed, your pants and underwear bunched at your ankles. I slide my hand up your thigh to the scar and you shiver and grab me by the hair. We kiss, we sink to the floor, but we never touch it. We just go on and on, tumbling through space like two bits of stardust that shed no light until it's finished. Our descent place. We sit up, nothing's different, nothing. Is it love? Is it friendship that pins us down until we give in, then rise defeated once more to re-enter the sanctuary of our separate lives? Sober now, you dress, then sit watching me go through the motions of reconstruction, reddening cheeks, eye-shadowing eyelids, sticking bobby pins here and there. We kiss outside and you walk off, arm in arm with your demon. So I've come through the whole ordeal of loving once again, sane, whole, wise. I think as I watch you, and when you turn back, I see in your eyes acceptance, resignation, certainty that we must collide from time to time. Yes, yes, I meant goodbye when I said it. Now, the flavor of that poem, or I should say more specifically, the texture of that poem is clearly different than the other one, especially when you get to, we go on, tumbling through space like two bits of stardust that shed no light. Once you hear that line, any confusion about whether this is a wonderfully sweet poem is long lost. I think it's lost early, actually. You know, but you get the sense of, lyrically speaking, this is a troubling poem. There's no way to take comfort in this poem, at least except in the sense that the speaker seems solid by the end of the poem. I guess there's some solace in that, but you get the sense that they are in this duo, they're in this not loving relationship, some kind of sexual necessity is governing how they behave toward each other, unlike, I want to die while you love me, while yet you hold me fair, while laughter lies upon my lips and lights are in my hair, right? I mean, it's such a different world. I think oftentimes when we're reading poems, other people's poems, probably we're more conscious of it, but there's always this involvement with certainly the images, but the images are really a reflection of the tone, the attitude of the writer toward what is being said, right? So when you get to things like, I slide my hand up your thigh to the scar and you shiver and grab me by the hair. We kiss, we sink to the floor, but we never touch it. And go on, on like two bits of stardust that shed no light until it's finished. That's a very different idea about intimacy than the previous poem. It's manifest both in the tone of voice. You can tell, I mean, is known, has been known for writing poems that are troubling portraits of a person. And this other poem by Georgia Douglas Johnson is a kind of embrace that, goodness gracious, we felt for love perhaps as teenagers in a way, or at least young people. And so there's a sharp contrast, not only in what we sense of the attitude, but of course in the images that are chosen by each poet. And this is a poem called Preface to a 20-volume suicide note. And it was written by Leroy Jones, of course, who became Amiri Baraka. But when he writes this book, he is still going by Leroy Jones. Preface to a 20-volume suicide note. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me. Each time I go out to walk the dog, let me start again. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog. or the broad-edged, silly music the wind makes when I run for a bus. Things have come to that. And now each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when they will not come to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. And when I opened the door, there was no one there. Only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands. Anyway, so that's a poem. There's certainly, I think there's some edges in that poem that I would consider kind of sharp. There's a kind of quiet kind of anxiety in it or anguish. And now each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when they will not come to be counted, I count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. So there seems in that to be some despair. But the poem turns very tender at the end with this image of this child praying, right? He hears this talking through the door and opens the door and finds his daughter talking to her own clasped hands. I mean, so it's ultimately the poem, even though it's contextualized by the first three stanzas, well, it's four stanzas, but there are a couple of the stanzas that are one-line stanzas. It's contextualized by a kind of desperation, but it resolves in this tender way. The other thing I wanted to point out about, I could talk about the Georgia Douglas Johnson poem this way too, is the pacing, the way the poem flows. There's a kind of soothing in that, in the Leroy Jones piece. And I will make a worksheet and hopefully it can be distributed by through the festival drop boxes. There's a kind of very steady calm in it. And there are also some very poignant stanza breaks. Things have come to that. And now, each night I count the stars, right? So there's that. There's the pacing that says, walk with me. I'm thinking hard. I'm a little bit sad, right? And then you have this by Ralph Dickey. Ralph Dickey is a poet not many people know about because I think he commits suicide pretty early in his life, I think in his 30s. But he's a really interesting poet, super intense. This is a poem called Father. If you don't know this poem, don't feel bad. I think it's a great poem, but I don't know many people who know it until I read it to them. And someone read this poem to me 40 years ago. And, you know, so it was rare then. But listen to what he's doing with this poem. The imagery as well as the pacing. What he has is I know you can't see it, but it's one stanza and the lines are really jagged. And even looking at the poem, you have a feeling that you're going to be rushed or somehow made uncomfortable. But listen to what he does. Father. I sat on my stool in the dark. A plane of light from the cracked door fell across my face like a burn. In the next room, my father was beating my mother to death. He kicked her until she cried blood, and then he kicked her until she came down with a coma. Then he kicked her until he just couldn't kick her no more. He came in to see me and put his hand on my shoulder. Listen, I want you to kill a man for me. I stood up. He shoved me back. Sit down. I'll give you $100. What do you say? I said, well, who is it? Here's a piece of paper with the man's name. Kill him. I'll give you $100. I opened the paper. My name was on it. I turned it over to see if there was and alternate. What is this? I said, some kind of goddamn joke? I never joke about money, he said. Even before I knew anything about poetry, and I heard this poem when I was just learning that I kind of was in love with poems. Man, this thing sent chills all over me, man. I didn't know whether to run, hide, or what, you know? And it's, of course, the subject matter is domestic violence, of course, which is troubling, but also the way it's paced. There's just no room for you to rest or escape, really. The poem just marches down the page in this very relentless way. The image, though, you know, that sets up the tone, I think, with, you know, without any kind of ambivalence, is I sat on my stool in the dark. A plane of light from the cracked door fell across my face like a burn. To me, it's right there when you think, uh-oh, there's trouble, you know? I mean, and the other thing I love about that moment is that it's such a clear image. We see someone sitting in a closet with the door cracked and the light just slipping in across their face. It's beautifully vivid, but also at the same time, really troubling. Certainly, whether or not you've ever witnessed any kind of domestic violence, this poem is really disturbing. And not only in the horror of the way the father treats the mother, but then the psychological thing he does to the son when he gives him a note and says, I'll pay you to kill this guy, and it's the son himself. Really horrifying, right? And you think if this is the kind of vision that was resident in Dickey, maybe we understand his early departure from this life. But again, it's just one of those poems that I would like to forget, but I cannot. It roughs me up every time I read it. Every time I get this, a set of sense that I want to run or something, or hide or something every time I read this piece. The other thing we don't think about a lot, because most of us are not formalists so much. But I just figured something to think about, because the really strict rhythms of form are, of course, related to our more fluid or less restrictive rhythms in free verse, though everything has rhythm. If you write a poem that has no rhythm, the poem is probably going to be dead, right? Anyway, this is a poem by Jim Zimmerman, and it's called Fly. I wish I could sing like hummingbirds fly. I wish I could hear the flowers. One day the leaves on the aspen are green. One day you tremble for hours. One day you feel like a cross without tenure. One day like a kid with a match. I wish I could just blow away like the clouds, or snuff all the stars with a breath. I wish I could take back the last wish I wished, but I can't, and I can't wish it harder. One day the world doesn't matter so much. One day it's meaner and smaller. One day they dress you in clothes of glass. One day they board up your eyes. I wish it wasn't so far to fall, wasn't so hard to fly. I wish I could go where the hummingbirds go when flowers thud death on the lawn. One day the leaves are waving goodbye. One day the leaves are gone. I mean, another, like a very tender lyric, right? Also somber, kind of sad, and the lines are alternate. I think it's more like something like 10, 11 syllables, and then the next line is shorter, and you can hear it in the rhythms. And it gives it, what I love about it is it It has a childlike quality. It has a nursery rhyme kind of quality to it. And that's part of what disarms us. And also, I think, what makes the poem even more poignant, because what is being said is not something a child would say, or not the kind of thing a child would be prepared really to listen to, at least with any real understanding. Where is it? One day they dress you in clothes of glass. One day they board up your eyes. I wish it wasn't so far to fall, wasn't so hard to fly, right? It's both surreal and troubling and kind of, I mean, I find that image, one day they board up your eyes, a really terrible and terrifying image, really. And then you have this, again, this kind of nursery rhyme rhythm. I wish I could go where the hummingbirds go, when flowers thud deaf on the lawn. One day the leaves are waving goodbye. One day the leaves are gone, right? And so I was contrasting that in terms of its physicality and the way we hear it or live it, those moments, with an old poem of mine. I'm only reading my own poem because it's I think a pretty sharp contrast to Jim Zimmerman's poem. And if you're interested in Jim Zimmerman's piece, that poem is from a book called Moon, Go Away, I Don't Love You No More. He was a great writer. I don't know how many of you know of him, but Moon, Go Away, I Don't Love You No More. Great, nice book. He has many fine books. I'll just read the first part of this poem and you'll hear the difference in the rhythm and the subject matter, of course. This is the Ballad of Sadie LeBabe. Sadie LeBabe was a magic sister. Lord, even a blind man couldn't have missed her. Her sultry skin was dark as shade. Her mind cut sharp as a butcher's blade. And the brothers who stared at Sadie's thighs would shake their heads and moan and cry. 'Cause Sadie moved like water poured. The shape she shaped had angels floored. She knew her walk turned wind to fire. A wink from Sadie turned brains to mire. The mellow fellas tried to talk that slide. They'd high sing, Sadie, when she walked by. But if she stopped to pass some time, the lines went stale and sank to slime. She yawned, she'd heard it all before. Stuff bad boys write on bathroom doors. 'Cause Sadie pours like rivers move. Her black skin rocks men toward the blues. She won't be mine, she won't be yours. She bit Eve's apple down to the core. Anyway, so that's the first part of that poem. But do you see how the rhythms operate differently? That poem is about some super bad, super fine woman and about, it has not been revealed yet, but there is this great desire that is engaged with another figure in that poem. And the rhythms are meant to be playful and bodily, really deeply bodily, right? So when you think about the texture of a poem, you might consider how one lives in the rhythms of the poem, how the body is touched by the rhythms of the poem, right? And that's in free verse as well as formal verse. You know, how is it that we are inhabited by the cadences of a poem, for example? That to me is also part of the texture of a poem, as much as imagery is. I mean, because of course we're imagining things, we're seeing things in the language, but we're also being inhabited by the rhythms of it. The pacing of the poem becomes part of us. If we are moved to dance to a poem, it may be because of that, right? That we are inhabited by it. Some of you may have seen Theodore Rutke, the video of Theodore Rutke reading his poem, My Papa's Waltz. If you ever see it, check it out. And he's actually kind of dancing, you know? Because people forget that I think there is that in poetry, right? That part of what we love about it, even if we are still when we're reading it, is that there is movement, you know, there is melody, there is rhythm, implied or explicit, depending on the poem, in a poem. You know, there's that stuff in it that makes it carries us along, right? If you think about narrative poems, for example, I think I have a couple minutes. All right. This is a poem by I'll read these two poems just as a contrast in tone and in imagery. I'll do that and then we'll close up because it's 2:34 and I think I'm close to being at my 30-minute mark. Anyway, these are two poems by Lucille Clifton. One is Hag Riding, a favorite poem of mine, and the other is Atlas. Some of you who are in my workshop already have these poems. But if you can hear in the tone the difference, how we're being addressed, and whether or not we are inviting, we feel moved to open our arms to embrace the fabric of the poem, if you will, or whether we feel, in some way chastened or made cautious by the news of the poem and the way it moves. So in Hag Riding, this is how it goes. This is, to me, the Satin, right? Why is what I ask myself. Maybe it is the African in me, still trying to get home after all these years. But when I wake to the heat of morning, galloping down the highway of my life, something hopeful rises in me, rises and runs me out into the road, and I lob my fierce thigh high over the rump of the day. And honey, I ride, I ride. Ugh. That jam, every time I just kind of like, oh yeah, I ride too, damn it. But check out what she's doing musically, right? Something hopeful rises in me, rises and runs me out into the road. And I lob my fierce thigh high, right? I lob my fierce thigh high. She could have chosen other words, but high is perfect there, right? I lob my fierce thigh high over the rump of the day, over the rump of the day. And honey, I ride, I ride. There's all kinds of music in there. It's not direct rhyme, but it is pretty clearly meant to be assonant. And for us to hear that music, right, that says, yeah, let's get the hell up and ride, right? The heat of morning becomes a horse, man. How can you not want to ride, right? Okay. The poem that I contrasted with is called Atlas. See what she's doing here with images. It's very different, and musically as well. This is Atlas, it's Atlas speaking, all right? It's a persona. I am used to the heft of it, sitting against my rib, used to the ridges of forest, used to the way my thumb slips into the seas as I pull it tight. Something is sweet in the thick odor of flesh, burning and sweating and bearing young. I have learned to carry it the way a poor man learns to carry everything. You hear the tone is very different, and much more of more of an anguished meditation. Atlas being obliged to carry the earth in a way that has very little to do with riding the galloping heat of summer, right? The first poem ends, I ride, and those long eyes, they do it, right? They have us taking off too, right? I have learned to carry it the way a poor man learns to carry everything. You hear the inflection die at the end of the word? The sound carries part of the tone, the nature of the word everything, right? Everything. It falls off at the end, right? And so you have a sense that, yes, I think there's beauty in that poem, but there's anguish in the poem too, and a kind of hopelessness. And so that's a very different flavor, a very different kind of embrace that we're given from the poem. We are invited to think, but not necessarily to dance, right? Anyway, those are just some thoughts I had about texture in poetry, that it's beyond imagery, that it's also about cadence. Images are critical when we think about the thick odor of flesh burning and sweating and bearing young. That picture, even though it's more on the abstract end of the spectrum, is very different than the heat of morning galloping down the highway of my life, right? So we have a sense of, in terms of being touched by the poem, we are touched differently because of both tone and image, pacing, and the subject matter itself. Anyway, those are some things to think about, and I'll create some kind of small PDF with a few of these poems, and you'll be able to look at them, but you can see it in most any poems that you read. You can see these elements if you call them to your conscious mind. Thank you very, very much. It was a real pleasure, and I hope it was of some use to you.
Okay, all right. That was so beautiful, Tim. Thank you. And hearing you read, I can't wait for tonight. So I am so happy to be among you today to talk about something that we all love, which is metaphor. So for 30 minutes, we get to luxuriate in metaphor. And I'm very pleased to be here with Tim, not just because we presented together in the past, which was an extraordinary pleasure, but also because you are a metaphor generator, luxuriator galore. And so I haven't told you this, but I'm going to be using some of your poetry as examples, because what an opportunity in question and answer, we can all ask you how you came up with them. So that's the question that really interests me, is where do metaphors come from? So what I would like you to do is hold up your hands. I can't see you, you're 100 to 150 people, but take a moment and I'll just imagine you with your hands in the air. This is the source of all your metaphors. And I don't mean your hands specifically, although we do type with them. I mean your whole body. So the locus of your experiences, sensations, memories, emotions, tune into that for a moment. Your senses, internal sensations, which includes emotions, which has the word motion, so it's energy, it moves or it's held. In any case, this is the whole writer. The wellspring of metaphor. So if you take a moment now to feel this totality, and perhaps next time you go to write, instead of immediately putting your hands on the keyboard or to a pad, you can just lift them into the air first. Now, what I'd like you to do now is take a look at your hands. They're so often in the line of sight, and yet do we ever really see them? Do we praise them? Well, Tim does. In Ode to My Hands, 5-legged spiders, knuckled starfish, grabbers of forks. Why do I forget that you love me? Your willingness to button my shirts, tie my shoelaces, even scratch my head. So when we see our hands in terms of something so different, like a starfish, that is for me what happens whenever a metaphor takes place. That's the best definition for a metaphor that I can think of, is seeing one thing in terms of another. And at first there's confusion because the things are so strikingly different. But then the images start to line up and you look at your hand and suddenly you see these funny wiggly appendages. A new picture has come into focus and you get this jolt of pleasure because where there was cognitive dissonance, suddenly it's been resolved, and the mind loves that because that's really good for survival. And so you get this rush of endorphins. It's kind of like whenever you get a joke or a riddle, it's the same thing. Endorphins are actually released. Now, what you also get is this feeling of communion, this meeting of minds, because together you've seen this new picture come into focus, you and the poet. And this is also very special about metaphor, is this transformation that you've witnessed together. When Mary Oliver says, look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light. The transformation there is the shift in your own perception in the moment of reading. It's as you're taking in the metaphor that the trees actually come into view. They come to light. And this is what happens every time a poet says, this thing is like another. They're saying to you, look, watch it transform before your eyes. And what happens to you is that as you see it come into view, there's this feeling of excitement, this feeling of being in touch with life itself. And you yourself are enlivened. The poet is seeing, you are seeing, and you remember that reality always is your seeing of it, what you bring to it. Tony Hoagland, let me read a bit from him, writes, when a beautiful woman wakes up, she checks to see if her beauty is still there. When a sick person wakes up, he checks to see if he continues to be sick. He takes the first pills in a 30-pill day, looks out the window at a sky where a time-released sun is crawling through the milky X-ray of a cloud. Metaphors are a revelation of reality, not some objective reality. Reality is not generic, one size fits all, the same for the beautiful as the sick. Our mirrors and windows, as they are in this poem, they give onto different worlds. But do we always recognize this about reality? Or do we accept the names and labels that turn reality into a cliche? Watching the sun crawl through the milky X-ray of a cloud, we're in touch with the reality of a sick person's world, and with the truth that every reality is an individual's unique experience of it. Are we fully in touch with our own reality? Reading poetry, we remember to become poets with respect to our own lives. We crave that same intimacy, a personal experience, wherever that lands on the spectrum from beautiful to horrific. We want to feel alive in the world, body and soul, even if it's excruciating. This is why Hoagland goes on to write, I sing the body like a burnt out fuse box, the wires crossed, the panel lit by red malfunction lights, the pistons firing out of sequence, the warning sirens blatting in the empty halls. And the hero is trapped in a traffic jam. The message doesn't reach its destination. The angel falls down into the body of a dog and is speechless, tearing at itself with fast white teeth, and the consciousness twists evasively like a sheet of paper traveled by blue tongues of flame. The poet is compelled to describe what it is to be here, even as being here in the body is excruciating, even as the body is burning up. This is the fire that we walk into as poets. He talks about the saint, unlike the poet, who looks steadfastly heavenward, away from the physical indignity below, exerting that power of denial the soul is famous for, that ability to say, none of this is real. But the poet, unlike the saint, describes it all. The consciousness can't escape the material, just as a piece of paper can't escape the flame that consumes it. Metaphors emerge from this place of embodiment, the fire of a resolve to be here, to really see and feel. His poem is also wonderful for illustrating another of the great gifts of metaphor, which is not just to bring into our presence the visible objects of the world, but also the invisible. Our emotions are often so hard to bring into view. This poem's called The Socks. While you were away, I matched your socks and rolled them into balls. And then I filled your drawer with tight, dark fists. So I imagine Jane Kenyon, who's the author of this poem, tuning into the energy inside, feeling it move into her arm, feeling how it wants to contract her hand into a fist. Lodging in our bodies with all of the sensations and the memories that are contained there, even as we're in a world of physical activity, doing the laundry, for example, that allows so many associations and interconnections to take place. Suddenly anger or longing, frustration takes on the shape of a balled up fist. But really, the interconnections are infinite. Once you open all those channels between the internal and the external, I mean, there's no end. You can think of any emotion and think, well, what are the infinite ways of describing it? Like, think of desire and the way it moves and where it goes. We heard a beautiful poem by Tim about that. And I'm going to offer up another example of his. He describes the way a woman's eyes take over an evening, how her legs move all the tall ships in my blood. And this thread pulled taut around my belly, the fluid spool of her hips, finding the book of praise inside me. And here's joy. Sun climbs over the trees and light runs towards you, runs, flailing its fast golden legs like a good dog who's been lost for years. There's a transformation here before our eyes where joy takes on physical form. It just starts with energy, with light, running, flailing, then legs, and then finally a full-blown dog bursts into view. That's what happens when the energy is let loose. It goes busting into the world of things and takes on physical form. And that's what happens when you let an experience take you over. When you're in the world of experience, not of names and labels, the mind grabs at what it can. It searches for resemblances. It goes veering down trails of memory and association. Logic, decorum, by the wayside. Light having legs, it's perfect. So the truth is that we are always using metaphors, whether we know it or not. We're always speaking of abstract things in physical terms. When we say, oh, that person is warm, or we talk about a distant relative, these are metaphors. And they're rooted in our infancy, when the difference between being warm and cold, hungry and sated, close and abandoned, we're all consuming experiences, all important. When I say or think, I'm going to put this in my talk, I'm being metaphoric in that moment because I'm actually saying that my talk is some sort of container that I can put something into. Or if you explain something to me and I say, I see, that's really poetic of me, because in that moment, I've taken your idea and I'm seeing it as an object that I'm beholding with my eyes. Emerson said that it was the poets who made all the words, because language is chock full of metaphor. Dormant metaphors, which is another metaphor. Imagine a snoozing metaphor. Totally dead metaphors. But in any case, he called it fossil poetry because it's as full of metaphors as limestone is of the fossils of creatures of long ago. So I tell you all this to give you a sense of how much we rely on our bodies and our senses to make sense of things, whether they're material or immaterial. We want to grasp them, smell them, know them by putting them in our mouths. We say that's food for thought because we want to take something that's abstract and make it tangible so we can ingest it and digest it. And doing this as poets, we trigger immediate connection and understanding. Think for a moment, imagine yourself, your whole self, in the presence of a door closing. It's a very simple action, a closing door. But when you're in the presence of it, all kinds of sensations and memories and associations are awakened and your whole body is activated. I want to read you Stillbirth by Laure-Anne Bosselaar, the pantoum. On a platform, I heard someone call out your name. No, Letitia, no. It wasn't my train. The doors were closing, but I rushed in, searching for your face. But no, Letitia, no. No one in that car could have been you. But I rushed in, searching for your face. No longer an infant. A woman now, blonde, 32. No one in that car could have been you. Teacher Marie was the name I'd chosen. No longer an infant, a woman now, blonde, 32. I sometimes go months without remembering you. Letitia Marie was the name I'd chosen. I was told not to look, not to get attached. I sometimes go months without remembering you. Some griefs bless us that way, not asking much space. I was told not to look, not to get attached. It wasn't my train, the doors were closing. Some griefs bless us that way, not asking much space. On a platform, I heard someone calling your name. Again and again in this poem, we experience those closing doors. Look how the poet trusts this image, this simple physical action to resonate metaphorically, so that her whole poem echoes with loss. We can't actually read something without imagining it. This is how we're wired. And when we imagine something, we actually, to some extent, even perform it. Muscle neurons are literally triggered. This is the power of finding a specific sensuous image for what is abstract or elusive or general. There's instant physical identification, and the reader brings to bear her whole self and her entire history. You can trust that. You can notice metaphoric resonance when it occurs, because often it occurs unconsciously, automatically. But if you notice it, then you can give it space to resonate. There is in this poem also the image of a journey. It's a journey that does not take place. The baby's born, but is stillborn. The idea of life as a journey brings me to the final point I want to make about metaphors. Metaphors are wonderful for bringing into view the physical objects of this world, as well as that which is invisible. They're also so useful for describing life as a whole. The dominant image we have of life is as a road with a destination. This shapes how most of us move through the world. But there are other options, other images. For example, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. So here we're thinking of life, and what we're experiencing is the narrowness of a stage. Certainly life has been reduced in this way, plus the brevity of those 2 hours of heightened drama. Macbeth says morosely, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. For something different, maybe life's like a Saturday morning cartoon. So Tim, this is what the coyote thinks, according to Tim Seibles. Does everyone know the Roadrunner cartoons? I don't know, some of you may be too young. I realized that, maybe not everyone does. But the coyote is constantly in hot pursuit all the time of a bird that he wants to kill and eat. But all of his plots always backfire. He goes up into smoke only to be completely reconstituted in order to do the same thing or some variation of the same thing in the very next episode. I've been after the Roadrunner for so long, I can't tell if it's hunger, love, or just plain stupidity. Maybe that's what's so goddamn funny. My life, whittled down to a riot of wild pursuits. Honestly, if you can just stand still for a minute, you can start to see the whole show. I mean, it's all perspective. If you can step out of the action long enough to catch your breath, you become your own audience. And of course, there you are, a scrawny animal in the middle of a desert, squeezing your knife and fork. That's actually almost as bleak as what Macbeth was saying, even as it's really funny. Hoagland, this is something from him. It's also this mixture of humorous and devastating. Describing his 9-year-old niece Lucinda at the Galleria shopping mall, the speaker says, "Today is the day she embarks upon her journey, swinging a credit card like a scythe through the meadows of golden merchandise." I think Hoagland would say all the world's a shopping mall. We wander in this haze of consumerism, oblivious to this figure of death that's hovering right here with his own scythe. And in America, it's getting late. And if there once was a journey with some semblance of meaning and purpose, it seems to have become a bit of a nightmare. This is what we see in several of his poems. Here's an example. Out on Route 28, the lights blaze all night on a billboard of a beautiful girl covered with melted cheese. See how she beckons to the river of late night cars. See how the tipsy drivers swerve under a breathalyzer moon. We're in the wilderness now, confused by the signs, with a shortness of breath and that postmodern feeling of falling behind. The metaphoric landscape here with travelers on a commerce-clogged highway, drunk, getting nowhere. This transforms our vision of reality in order to put us in touch with something we might otherwise have trouble grasping. In all of these cases, these are metaphors that capture life as a whole. Most of the time, we're just bumbling along from day to day, maybe in a somewhat drunken way. In any case, we don't have a perspective of the whole. And this is why we so often turn to art in order to take stock, to get a sense of what we're doing in general. So here, Hoagland in his poems are putting us in touch with, one of his poems is called America. He's putting us in touch with the trajectory of our nation as a whole, which is otherwise hard to grasp, but metaphorically creates an instant landscape that we can step into and experience with our whole selves and see how that resonates. Is it true? Do I want to reevaluate? Someone who dedicated his life to understanding this trajectory was the man whose birthday we celebrated on the opening day of our festival. Martin Luther King was able to behold the whole arc of history, and he was passionate in his desire to see it bend towards justice. This is why he spoke almost entirely in metaphor. Sometimes it's just an ongoing stream. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Sunlit path, the feeling of the ground solid beneath your feet, these things hit us viscerally. King wanted the path to be real. He wanted people to see themselves on it so that they'd be that much less likely, so they'd actually be inspired to endure the hardships along the way and not be turned aside. Without this kind of vision, without something concrete, it's so easy to keep spinning in the dark, tranquilized with what he called the drug of gradualism. Metaphors transform reality, revealing both the horror and the potential. The truth is, reality is open-ended. It has no limits. It's unfolding constantly with a boundlessness that we can step into. This is what Mary Magdala does in a poem by Mary Cornish. Mary Cornish, I presented with her at the very first Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And I'll end with this image, I think. So Mary of Magdala witnesses the resurrection, but in this poem is not at all what she expects. The body is gone, and in its stead, there's a boundlessness and the world's sheer presence. Christ's ascension returns her to earth with an exquisite awareness of being alive. She struggles to find the words for it. And in the end, this is what she says. How do I tell the others that the soul resurrected is only this mapless terrain? A mouse asleep in the furrow, 12 winds at the edge of the earth, and the hills running into the sky with open arms. So Tim looks at his hand, and it's a revelation. He asks, why do I forget that you love me? It's easy for reality to become a cliche, for us to find ourselves disconnected from the uniqueness of every moment as it unfolds. This is why we keep going back to poetry, to be continually resurrected, to be reminded, to come back to life. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was an amazing craft talk. I'm going to start off with just a little quote from Laure-Anne in the chat when she said, "We are well springs of metaphor." And that seems to be a uniting comment for the two of you. The first question I'm going to ask is from Kimberly Rose, and it's actually for both of you. Do each of you have a pre-writing ritual? Do you listen to music? Do you read? How do you get into the groove to have so much musicality and texture to your writing and to come up with these felt metaphors you love in your own work and that of others? So who'd like to start with that?
I mean, I can start, I suppose.
Okay.
I think I often do read before I begin to write. It's more about settling my soul than it is about trying to get ideas from what I'm reading. I'm often reading prose, for example, before I write poems. I just like I don't know, there's a calm in reading that I think just settles me into language. In terms of the metaphors that I might use or whatever inventions might come to me, I think after a while, if you've been lucky enough to encounter poets that you love, you're obliged to be inhabited by them. And so I think at a certain point, your imagination is just full. And I think that's what allows you to invent. I don't think, had I not read people like Neruda, Merwin, Anne Sexton, Lucille Clifton, Yusef Komunyak, I mean, you can go down the list, Vicente Huidobro, I mean, you know, go down the list, it goes on and on. I don't think I could be as inventive as I feel like can be now. It's really, I feel like I'm stepping into the river that they established, or I mean, all the way back to Sappho, of course, but even before that, I'm just saying, you know, you step into this river and you see the possibilities through the writing of the people, and that's what allows you to be inventive, I think. I think that's it.
Karin?
Okay. So personally, when I was talking about, you know, going through your days from thing to thing, often only a certain part of you is active, you know, the part that gets things done. It's a fraction of that whole self I was talking about. So I would say whatever anybody does for themselves to tune in when in the course of the day, they ask themselves, you know, what am I thinking or really feeling here? That requires you to sink into your body. And I imagine that you might all have different ways of doing that. I think I just do it somewhat automatically because that's what writing is. And maybe, you know, I love the art of acting and learning about it. And I think maybe I think of writing as acting, and an actor steps onto the stage, you know, with their bodies. They can't leave those behind, the way I think when Kenman was writing, thinking, oh, it's just my fingers or it's my brain or something. An actor has no choice. They're out on the stage and everything has to come on board. So yeah, so I think for me now, I associate writing so much with just this you know, being in space, being connected, that it happens somewhat automatically. But like I said, there's all different ways in which we do that. I'm reminded of Charles Dickens and how apparently when he was figuring out a character, he would actually get up in front of a mirror and talk and act it out so that he could really embody that person. And you know, these kinds of things stick with me, and so I associate acting with writing, and maybe I bring that to it every time I start to write.
Okay, we have another question from Lenny De La Roca. How much is stream of consciousness in your work, and how much is a pre-decided subject?
I mean, I can speak to that. I think part of what you develop when you write, especially, you develop a certain relationship to your imagination. If you write regularly, your imagination, as Karin suggests, it just becomes part of the way your mind works. People wonder, oh, where does that idea come from? Well, I mean, where do your dreams come from? I mean, I have no say in how I dream. And there's some of the wildest things I can imagine happen in dreams, you know? So I think by writing regularly, and of course, you're always fed by other writers, of course, but when your own practice kind of keeps the door open and the possibilities are really infinite. I think most of us know this. You know, the language can contain everything, you know, and maybe more than everything, in fact. But I think it's the practice of allowing yourself to engage life imaginatively. That practice just transforms the way your mind works. Analogously, and I'm sorry to take so long, analogously, imagine yourself as a saxophone player. When you're first learning to play, you're thinking about the notes and the scales and what key am I in? But at a certain point, you think about the virtuosos. They're playing as though they're just breathing, as though it is as natural to them to play that instrument as it is to walk down the street. And that's because they've internalized the possibilities of the instrument, not to say they can't learn more, but that they are so intimate with the instrument that things emerge that they couldn't themselves predict. I think in language, it's the same. At a certain point, if you write and write and write, you become very intimate with language, like an instrument. English is my instrument. And so when I write, it's like the river just opens up. And, I mean, this is not to say one doesn't write crap occasionally. That's not what I'm suggesting. But that the possibilities seem to just swim through you at a certain point.
Thank you. Someone in the chat was saying, wow, a wonderful metaphor. And I guess you really are the metaphor generator. Karin?
Yeah, sure. The question was where to start. Was that it? Starting?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure subject is so good. That sounds like something for an essay, and that's precisely where I think you don't want to go. In my experience, not coming from a place of the mind, but more the stream of consciousness. But then in terms of, well, where is that stream and where do I jump in? Instead of subject, for me, for some reason I use the word node. So a node, you don't even know exactly what it is. It's internal, it's a feeling, maybe it's connected to some subject, like some experience or some events. But really the starting point for me is that feeling, which does not have language yet. Like a subject already has language. And then maybe you're gonna go off into, on some abstract path, but a feeling that has no language, that's the challenge, I think, is to start with the thing that hasn't been described and find words for that. And you know what I'm also reminded of, so what Laure-Anne, I'll never forget this, what she said, where to start. And it's sort of similar to what I was saying, but she says the heat, where's the heat? So that's just pure sensation. That's not a subject. That's something internal. You don't even know where it's going to take you, but you do have a starting point, and then you let the stream of consciousness go. But you root in that feeling, and you don't let go of it. You don't let yourself go abstract. You just stay in touch with the heat, and then it's like, yeah. I mean, to change metaphors, then it's a wave that you can then ride. You don't try to direct the wave by any means; then you'll totally lose it. So that's where the stream of consciousness certainly comes in.
Yeah, if I could just follow up just quickly.
Sure, absolutely.
Karin made some mention, I think, during her craft talk of the managing mind. Maybe you said it recently, I'm not sure. But this is the thing, as we become adults, the managing mind takes up way too much energy. And you have to figure out a way to turn that tide back so that you can get to this other place, what I like to call the dreaming mind. The dreaming mind does not really exist in boundaries that we can measure. And that's where the strange metaphors and images come from. The managing mind has routines, has things it has to accomplish. But the dreaming mind says, maybe this, maybe that. What about this? Have you ever considered this? Think of this, see this, and that's that stream of consciousness with regard to the question that was asked. That's the stream of consciousness. Your mind just says, yeah, this and this and this and this and this, and you just got to grab hold of something and ride it into the poem.
Laure-Anne Bosselaar says, the way I enter writing is by reading poetry for about an hour. And the metaphors in those poems I read, both Satin and Corduroy, open for me the possibility to dialogue with them in my response to them. Is that the same for you two?
Karin, go ahead. I don't want to keep talking first.
Yeah, no, yes. I think it's what Tim is talking about, going into the dreaming mind. It just limbers you up. It makes you let go a bit of logic. It helps your mind to move into this different place. Definitely. That was so well put, Laure-Anne.
I generally don't read poems before I write, which is interesting. I mean, because that's what I'm writing is poetry, and 90% of the time, or 95% of the time. But I just like to be in some kind of I like to be seriously engaged with language. And then I put the book down and then I begin to write. I think I'm not sure when because I once upon a time I did read poems before I wrote, but I think I found myself inclined toward writing like what I was reading. I think that might have been the reason I said, let me read prose instead. Because there are writers, of course, like all of us have writers that we just dearly love. If I'm reading Merwin, if I'm reading, Sexton, if I'm reading Gwendolyn Brooks, if I'm reading Garcia Lorca, I mean, I want to sound like them. And I think that's probably why I started reading prose. I thought, then I'm less inclined to trying to sound like the writer. I think that's what it is. But whatever turns that engine over in your head, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. Yeah.
Here's a little different perspective from Martha Rhodes, and I'd like to hear your comments on this. There are terrific poets who do start with subject, who do research, for instance, and think about structure of the work even before the poems are cast. Mm-hmm. The subject brings them to language. Daniel Tobin comes to mind, Elizabeth T. Gray. They research, they travel to sites and libraries, they build their work.
Well, I mean, I think you can do that. As I said, I don't have any particular rules about how you come to the poem. When I was writing a number of poems about Frederick Douglass, his wife, his lover, and John Brown, I was researching all over the place, because I wanted to get their voices right and get the details right. So I don't have any problem with that. I mean, whatever. I mean, all I care about in the end is that the poem does something, that moves you. I mean, if you can do it through research, great. If you can write, if you can map out a poem first and still make it sing, I mean, I'm all for it. Whatever makes it happen, you know what I mean? Whatever makes it happen. Beautiful.
Karin?
Well, I imagine, Tim, that when you then sit down to write the poem, that you do go into your dreaming mind at that point.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe, I find this, it seems to be quite important to distinguish these different modes. And I think when you start a poem, like the actual poem, to then be clearly in the dreaming mind, then maybe later when you revise to bring in more of the research and other things again. And
right.
you know, sometimes it seems like I can get into trouble if it's, okay, so I've just been doing some skate skiing. Okay, so here's the mind, right? Right away going to metaphor. And to make it really happen well, you have to commit to one leg and then you commit to the other. And if you kind of don't do that, you're just like this flailing mess that's not going anywhere. And it just starts slipping all over the place. So I think of that in the two parts of our mind, you know, the dreaming mind and then the mind that does the research and all of that, and also does the revising. And it seems like sometimes it's really good to commit to one or the other. And at the start, I think committing to the dreaming mind, not the start of the whole project, but the start of actually writing the poem, to commit to the dreaming mind, to really commit. You know, don't start analyzing or so, well, that's not logical. Light doesn't have legs. That's stupid. You know, well, that's brilliant. You know, just keep writing. And then later when you revise, it's this interesting, it's actually a kind of interesting amalgam, I think, because you want to keep being creative. You want to keep having that dreaming mind on board, even as some part of you is seeing, okay, what's the effect of that? What's the effect of that? Did that change accomplish this, but then reverse this other thing that was actually going well? But you still want to have that dreaming mind on board, because otherwise you're in a void. Like you're making choices based on just ideas or maybe rules. And I totally agree with Tim about rules.
Yeah, consciousness is wildly intricate. If I have any huge complaint about the way we're educated in this society, and probably many societies, it's because they cheat us out of the complexity of consciousness. The mind is a really intricate and wildly uncharted place. And art is one way, you know, that we chart it, right? I mean, I have by no means exhausted my mind, but at the same time, you get just a glimpse of just its wild complexities and its beauty too, and its terrors as well. You know, and that's the thing I would say. That's why I think when people think about what's the right way to do something, that's your managing mind in operation. You know, like, oh, can I do this right? Who knows what right is, man? You just in poetry, you know right when you hear it. You know what I mean? You hear something, you're like, that gets me. You know, and there's no explaining it. You just know it hits you. And in your own practice, there are moments like that when you're writing, you think that's it. You don't have any explanation for it. I mean, yeah, I read a lot and I think a lot, but I can't explain why some particular image or one moment is poignant in a way that surprises me. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to be complexly conscious and to accept that much of what we do as artists especially is not going to come under the governance of reason or logic or explanation. You have to just believe in that. And I think this is what our education beats out of us in certain ways. You can watch it for a minute. I won't go on any too long. But children, when you talk to little kids at 4 or 5, when they have enough language to talk, man, their heads are all over the place. You hand them a stick and leave them alone for 10 minutes, the stick is an airplane. The stick is a spaceship. The stick, my God, it could be anything. They're not saying, is it right that the stick is an airplane? You know what I mean? They're just like, they're gone, you know? And that potential remains in our consciousness. It remains there, but it becomes dormant because we become more and more and more the managers of life, which is a kind of death, to be quite honest, but I don't want to get started on that.
Here's a question for both of you, and this may be our last one. It's 3:28, we'll see. This is from Mark Robinson. Simple student to teacher question. Who do you read? Are there any new voices out there you really love? Old voices that move you still?
I mean, Karin, you can start. I mean, goodness gracious. I can't hear you.
Karin, you have to unmute.
I was just going to say, I gave you a good sample of the poets that I adore.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to be a poet and not be in love with other poets. I mean, I don't know what to say really, but if you're thinking as a teacher, if you're thinking about what you might teach, maybe that's what it's part of the question. I mean, part of my life as an educator and as a teacher of writers is that you want to be an ambassador for other poets and for poetry in general. So depending on who you're talking to, I mean, you know, goodness gracious, I read everybody. The poets that I love, I will always love, for example, Pablo Neruda. He was a huge influence in my life. Even someone like Gil Scott-Heron, who is not known as a literary poet, but there was a certain kind of ferocity in him that I have tried to draw on as a poet, you know. You know, the poet I read a little bit of earlier, her interest in persona, I mean, her reading her work transformed the way I think about poetry. I mean, you know, you go down the road, you know, I mean, you can just go down the list, Cesare Pavese, the Italian poet, and a whole nother chapter that I could think of. I don't know, I don't want to go on and on, but yes, there are poets that I love very much. Contemporary poets, gosh, someone like Willie Perdomo is a great poet, I think. Kayamba Jess, Greg Pardlow. I mean, these are friends of mine, but I have huge admiration for them. Let me think.
We love them too. They were here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Nikki Finney, great poet. Goodness gracious. They're just like Patricia Smith, you know, of course, really, really wondrous. I'm just, I mean, my head is, my cup runneth over, really, you know. If you read a lot of poetry, you're going to find the people you're in love with. That's all I can say.
And Karin, anyone in addition to Tony Hoagland and Laure-Anne Bosselaar and Jane Kenyon?
You know, somebody that popped to mind that I adore is not contemporary, Gerald Manley Hopkins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, the poets that are here at the festival, I mean, Karin, you're very sweet to mention me, but my goodness gracious, the people who are here, it's ridiculous. Vievee Francis, David Baker, Laure-Anne Bosselaar, and I know I'm forgetting people off the top of my head, but I mean, they're all amazing. I don't know what to say about it, really. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. There's so many fine poets walking around, people from whom you can get very particular things that you can get from no other poet. Doesn't mean that the other poets are lacking. It just means everybody has their own flavor. And part of that flavor is made manifest because they've lived their lives, a particular life that makes them who they are. And the poems become emblems of a certain sense of being human. And that's, I mean, what more can you ask for? It is analogous, again, to music. You listen to Bach, you hear a life in Bach. You listen to Jimi Hendrix, that's a life. There's a sense of the world in these sounds, right? It's the same in poems, you know, which is why you feel like you have such good company in poets. I'm stopping. Read Karin. She's amazing. Traci Brimhall. I mean, you can go on and on and on. Eduardo Corral. All of them. They're just remarkable. Read them all. Memorize them all.
Okay. Any last words, Karin?
No, I'm just so pleased to be talking with you all and hearing these wonderful questions and just luxuriating in poetry together.
And we're all going to avoid cliche, right? In the way we make sense of our reality. Thank you, the two of you. This has been a fantastic craft talk. And thank you all for your comments in the chat and your questions. And as always, we're going to say goodbye, put links into the chats that you need. Let's have a round of applause for our poets. And then life begins again at the virtual bookstore. And we look forward to seeing you tonight at our final reading with David, Vievee, and Eduardo. And don't forget open mic number 3 from 4 to 6. Thank you, everyone.